Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of WWE's Payback 2015. And if I could describe the overarching theme of this pay-per-view, I'd probably just sum it up as filler. It's not unentertaining, however, I feel like almost everything I talked about in my review of Extreme Rules applies here, from the build-up to the execution. I really didn't feel like this pay-per-view served any purpose other than to get people to subscribe to the network. Maybe that's because Elimination Chamber is coming up in a few weeks, and that's going to be the real important pay-per-view of this month. But Payback just seemed kind of unnecessary. I didn't feel like any stories or many stories had been resolved, or that there was going to be a new spin on them. It just kind of seemed like same shit as we got last month. But let me bring up my notes and talk about each and every match and feud, and which ones worked and which didn't. So the pre-show, oh my god. For some reason they decided to have R-Truth take on Stardust, two low-card performers who WWE has no interest in right now, which is strange because sometimes Stardust actually does seem over with the crowds. They do enjoy chanting Cody at him, and I feel like there's a really good story in there, but WWE just has no interest in the character. Whereas R-Truth, I like R-Truth to a point, but at the same time, I'm not really interested in seeing a push. I want to see R-Truth turn heel, because I think he was at his most entertaining as the over-the-top villain. But unfortunately, it's like WWE doesn't really care about him either and just uses him as a jobber. Surprisingly, I believe he won. It was a very bland match that could have easily been seen on Main Event or SmackDown. Nothing about it really stood out to me at all. The only thing that I'll remember it for is the fact that it was totally unnecessary for this pre-show. They could have used that time to expand on the other pre-show match, which was the Meta Powers, Damien Sandow and Curtis Axel versus the Ascension. And the majority of this storyline was told on Main Event, which I sporadically watch. And even then, usually when I see Main Event, it's only because I was watching another WWE show like SmackDown and it was just still playing on Hulu while I was doing something else. Oh my gosh, they really ruined Sandow in my opinion. He was so over with the crowds, and it seemed like his break with The Miz would launch him into bigger and better things, and yet WWE has no faith in the guy. It just seems to tease doing something big and awesome with him, like him potentially winning the Andre the Giant Battle Royale, only for it not to happen. I thought it was very strange and confusing when he lost to The Miz, who was about to leave and film his movie, so it's not like The Miz really needed that victory, since he's not going to be around for a while. And then it just almost killed Sandow's momentum. I was hoping that they'd make him into like a Daniel Bryan-like character, because he was really doing a good job as the underdog babyface, in my opinion. Instead, they demoted him to a program with Curtis Axel, where he continues the imitation stuff, except this time he's doing Macho Man Randy Savage. I don't find it funny at all. I think he's really trying his hardest to make it work, but I've found it more annoying than anything. Whereas with Curtis Axel, I think Curtis Axel's a good in-ring worker, but he just has such a bland personality that he sort of needs this over-the-top comedic gimmick, whereas I don't think Sandow does. And when they decided to work together, the only good thing that came out of it, in my opinion, is that they're finally turning Curtis Axel face. And I only say that because I feel so bad for Curtis Axel as the heel, because it just, the way he's constantly getting humiliated, I never take any pleasure in seeing him, abused. I was especially annoyed when Ryback came out for no reason and decided to verbally berate him and throw him under the bus before kicking the crap out of him. When last we saw, they were friends. So I kind of liked that. But then when they entered this program with the Ascension, it could have been interesting just because of the Ascension's gimmick, but unfortunately nobody really gives a shit about the Ascension anymore. And I didn't care. This was kind of just a dumb storyline, and the match itself was pretty mediocre. It didn't go long enough. It didn't seem like the crowd was all that interested. Yeah, there were moments, I guess, but nothing about this really stood out to me outside of the fact that it exists. And that's really making me doubt the abilities of the Ascension, because they've yet to really impress me since they've gone to the main roster. I hear they, delivered some classics in NXT, but they just aren't given that much time. They're not given the right opponents, and it always seems like when they are given, very talented opponents like the Lucha Dragons, speaking of which, where are they? The matches are too short, but also they're designed to make the Lucha Dragons look good, and they don't look that great themselves. So it was a pretty shitty pre-show. Moving on to the relevant matches, Dolph Ziggler versus Sheamus. So nothing about this storyline was any different than what we had gotten before Extreme Rules. The exact same build-up. Sheamus would often work with Barrett, and Ziggler would often work with Neville. None of the promos stood out to me, if they had any promos at all. Whereas at least before Extreme Rules, like Sheamus had a cool bit where he was squashing Ziggler while talking trash on the mic. I could remember some of the stuff Sheamus said. I can't think of a whole lot that Ziggler said, but I find Ziggler to be such a bland personality that very rarely does he do anything to stand out, outside of the fact that he can deliver entertaining matches. So I was totally underwhelmed by this. I was actually wrong, though, in my prediction. I thought Ziggler would win this time. But while he did get his revenge by forcing Sheamus to kiss his ass, I still think there's something incredibly homoerotic about that. But he did lose. And as somebody who doesn't want to see Ziggler go beyond the mid-card, I was pleased. Whereas I do think Sheamus could make an interesting main event heel, at least right now. I'm 100% aware that most people disagree with me, and I do believe that WWE should utilize Ziggler more effectively just because he's so over with the crowds, but on a personal level, I just could care less about Dolph Ziggler outside of just being talent enhancement. As for the match itself, I've noticed another problem with Ziggler is that so many matches of his, while entertaining, they're just so alike. There's very little about this match that was different than their last match together. It was fast-paced, there were some good spots, but outside of the fact that Ziggler got his revenge, and the finish, which I'll talk about in a moment, just nothing really retains here. It was an easy watch. Both Sheamus and Ziggler are really good workers, so there's no reason they wouldn't provide a very fun match, and it was. It just, once again, nothing about it felt important. Does Sheamus get anything by this victory? I don't know. Maybe they'll put him in the Intercontinental title scene. But it wasn't like there were any stakes. It was just putting these guys together in order to fill the card. So the ending was weird because it looked like Ziggler headbutted Sheamus, but it backfired and he ended up getting really bloody. I'm not sure if he bladed himself. I've actually heard that he did not. But I'm not sure if that was a planned spot or not, if maybe Ziggler just messed up and accidentally smashed, or Sheamus could have messed up. But, they butted heads, and that seriously cracked Ziggler's skull open, so they had to finish it real quickly. Or maybe that was always the plan, that, Ziggler would make himself bleed the old-fashioned way. But then, underestimated how much it would take him out, because Ziggler just looked off throughout the duration of the match, and his wrestling psychology isn't that good, so I have to presume that he was really hurt and in a bad spot at that time, because when Sheamus brogue kicked him, it just seemed sort of premature. But if that was intentional, why? I just kind of made Ziggler look stupid. If not, then it was an accident. But it didn't. The blood didn't really add anything to this match, in my opinion. Sometimes it does, like in Roman Reigns versus Lesnar. When Lesnar cracked his skull open near the end, that really added a lot to the match. Whereas I didn't feel the same with this one. Okay, so the tag team championship, New Day versus Cesaro and Kid. I actually really liked this matchup, even though the feud itself was relatively ordinary. One thing I find strange is they aren't giving a whole lot of promo time to either Kid or Cesaro. Most of this feud is based around the New Day being annoying and goofy and, getting heat. I have mixed feelings about this, as I do believe Kid and Cesaro are better characters than people give them credit for. Like, as long as Cesaro isn't hogging the mic for too long, he actually can give a short and sweet promo. And Tyson Kidd always seemed like he was pretty natural talker. So I wish they did more with them, but the New Day is pretty fun as villains. They're just so over the top, and I will admit that I've really begun to enjoy their mic time. But otherwise, it's a relatively ordinary feud. It's just them constantly wrestling, the New Day cheating and sneaking away with the win, and very conventional stuff. And I guess that's okay. But the match itself was phenomenal. I thought even better than their last one. I thought it was cool when Cesaro and Big E got really competitive and start trying to show each other up in regards to who was stronger. It could have been just as easy to have, Cesaro constantly lifting Big E and dropping him down and, showing off his abilities. But no, Big E even got some moments where he could do the same, and I thought that was really neat. I thought I'm really kind of liking Xavier Woods as support, even though I wish he'd be used more in matches, because I'm still not really sure what he's capable of, because I've never really seen a full-on match with him. Usually it was him either getting squashed or, he might be in the tag match, but he just doesn't do much. Big E and Kofi are usually the ones who do the most, but Xavier Woods just cracks me up when he starts responding to those New Day sucks chants. It's like, no, we're the champions. So that was pretty funny, and I really liked how he got involved in the ending. That was really strange, but kind of a funny and unique twist on this matchup that gives the New Day some momentum as villains. But at the same time, it's also kind of clever that they did that. So I can't just say, the New Day cheated. It was a tainted victory. That was actually a pretty smart move. But otherwise, it was just an awesome, fast-paced, and intense matchup. Great spots. And, even if you choose to skip Payback, if you can watch this match, I strongly suggest you do it. In a lot of ways, it was my favorite match of the show. Although as I get into some other matches, that's sort of a complicated thing to say because, we'll get to that later. But at the absolute least, it is a contender for my favorite match in this show, if not the number one. Bray Wyatt versus Ryback. Story-wise, I thought this was really kind of stupid. I don't like the fact that whenever Ryback gets the mic, he's pretty much just saying the same thing over and over again, talking about how much he's overcome. I swore he did this exact same speech before. One thing I will give him credit for is he did manage to get an initially sarcastic crowd on his side. That's not very easy to do, but he pulled it off, so good job, Ryback. Otherwise, the problem is Bray's motivations make no sense. Now, granted, Bray's motivations are often very vague. Why did he attack Ambrose? Why did he attack Jericho? I'm still not entirely sure. But in the case of Ryback, Bray says, "You're in my way." And I'm thinking, how is he in your way? If anything, Ryback has gone out of his way to stay out of everybody's way. Everybody important, that is, because usually Ryback only shows up to beat up a low card jobber like Bo Dallas or Curtis Axel. He's not going for any belt. He's not trying to get a real main event spot. He's just kind of there. So, I mean, if Bray attacked somebody who was pursuing a championship, like, I don't know, it's hard to say anymore. Well, let's just say, like, even Neville, who he might not be pursuing it right now, but he probably will be in the immediate future. I could buy that more. You know, he's taking out the competition, but instead, Ryback's just kind of minding his own business, and then Bray just decided to get involved with him. So that just seems very strange. The match itself, I thought would suck, and it didn't. It had decent pacing, but seemed rather sluggish compared to its predecessors. I mean, the Tag Team Championship and the Ziggler vs. Sheamus matches. But I expected a lot worse. I did think that it was surprisingly competitive. Ryback seemed intense. Like he'd often get over Bray and beat the crap out of him. Then Bray would return that, and it was very good back and forth stuff. Both men worked hard, even though I don't think they had the best of chemistry. Bray Wyatt is a very unusual performer in that I can't really describe his style. Usually a wrestler is very offensive based or very defensive based. Usually smaller guys, they're offensive based, whereas usually the bigger guys, they're defensive based. So like the smaller guys are going to run and jump into people, whereas the big guys, they're going to catch them and stuff like that. Ryback is definitely a defensive based fighter. Bray, it tends to go back and forth depending on who he's fighting. Maybe he's like one of those jack of all hands type wrestlers. But still, you know, even though I don't think they had the best chemistry, they worked hard enough to make it a thoroughly watchable match. Something that I think would have been better on Raw, but not bad. And they did try to tell a decent story where Ryback kind of went in with an injury, and I'm glad Bray won. I think Bray needed the win more because I think Bray has a better shot at being a true main eventer than Ryback. I think Ryback's good mid-card material, but Bray I'd like to see go farther. But like once again, nothing amazing, but perfectly acceptable. Especially considering I thought this was going to be sort of the showstopper in all the worst possible ways. Much like how I thought Big Show and Roman Reigns was going to totally derail Extreme Rules, and that ended up being one of my favorite matches on the card. I can't say the same thing here, but it still was decent. Rusev vs. Cena for the United States Championship. God damn it, this is going to be a very, very, very difficult one to describe. In terms of the storyline, for the most part, it played out the same way that it worked in building up to Extreme Rules. Just John Cena doing the open challenge, and Rusev will occasionally show up to remind us that yes, he is feuding with John Cena. The one big difference is the whole bit with Lana. Now, in Extreme Rules, Lana started getting some serious chants, and then Rusev sent her in the back. I thought that was very odd, because even though Lana occasionally would get chants, it's not common enough to where I'd think that was an intended, that was a planned spot for Extreme Rules. The only thing I can guess is maybe when it first started happening, which is I think when she had vanished to film a movie a couple months ago, they told Rusev, if this happens again, go ahead and do this. Or maybe Rusev just kind of thought it up on the fly. I don't know. However, I think it's a big, big mistake for WWE to turn Lana face. The way she has developed just seems very out of character. She always seemed real dominant and in control. Now, granted, there were implications that maybe she wasn't quite as tough as she appeared. She wilted when Stephanie McMahon confronted her during the build-up to Survivor Series. So she's not as strong as she appears. And you could argue that Rusev in his own way is sort of getting out from under her shadow. He's developing much more as a character. over the past few months. But still, it just doesn't feel right to me. It seems incredibly odd when you have Lana start fandangoing. It just doesn't feel like Lana anymore. And so I think they're going about this the worst possible way. And I think this is actually one of the very rare cases where the WWE Universe is at fault. I mean, sometimes their voices lead to greatness, like, the whole Daniel Bryan push. Before WWE decided to abort that, it seemed like Sandow was going that same route. Or same with Ziggler. I mean, the fans love Ziggler so much that WWE pretty much put him in the most prominent role at Survivor Series before once again they gave up on that. But I just think it's too early for Lana to turn face and split with Rusev. I think instead they should have, maybe they will do this, but teased their split up only to have Lana somehow turn it around and bring more heat on her than what she had gotten before. Lana just seems like somebody who works better as a natural heel to me. So I really did not like that. But as to the match itself, it started off really boring, just Rusev beating the crap out of Cena. And then once they get it outside of the ring, this actually became probably the most satisfactory match on the entire card. They told a really good story, where both men brought each other to the limit. They were doing all sorts of crazy stuff to hurt each other. I thought Rusev's almost sadistic glee at parts was kind of terrifying. Well, when he made Cena pass out, that was pretty awesome, and that could actually save Rusev from getting knocked down too far on the card, even though he has been pretty much fed to Cena. And yet Cena also, had some real badass moments, and it made Rusev look badass just because he wasn't quitting, and you just felt like the desperation from both men, that these guys were putting everything they had into making each other submit, and it just wasn't happening, so they were getting frustrated and panicking, and I did not at any point think of this as a smark, somebody who knows wrestling is fake. I was just totally invested in this storyline that for a moment I accepted it as real. That very rarely happens to me anymore. I am, if anything, if you watch these videos, you should know that I am quite the jaded wrestling fan. I'm constantly getting frustrated thinking about about a match from a booking level or just its general presentation. I generally look at it through the eyes of somebody who thinks wrestling is real. Like in movies, I'm a critic. I mean, I could dissect the direction, cinematography, screenwriting, and so on, but still, a good movie invests you into the story to where I'm not really thinking about it while I'm watching it. Unfortunately, wrestling, I can't really say the same for, except it happened here, and that amazed me. And it's kind of sad because this match hasn't been especially well received. In fact, people seem to be rather indifferent to it, so I'm very much alone here. But I loved it. I was blown away just on a storytelling level. And plus, the spots were very brutal and intense. However, I do think that it was misplaced on this card. In my opinion, it should have happened before the World Heavyweight Championship match, because it is an exhausting match. It has a slow burn pacing that will exhaust, I think, the general viewer, which will make the subsequent matches, Neville versus Barrett and the Bellas versus Nikki and Tamina, look very slow and boring in comparison. Or it's just going to magnify how lackluster those matches could potentially be. Whereas at least with the World Heavyweight Championship match, it's it's going to be a fast-paced affair. That's how those kinds of matches work, which I think could wake the audience up. But after this experience, I barely registered anything that happened in the following two matches. So the Bellas versus Nikki, wrote that down wrong on my notes, Naomi and Tamina. Story-wise, it got better compared to the build-up leading to Extreme Rules. I thought it was smart, clarifying Naomi's motives and adding Tamina there. Did something. I thought that was pretty cool. The problem was, I feel like this feud is just built in shit. You can improve it, but it's still not going to be good no matter what you do. In my opinion, the Bellas should have never turned face. Nikki just is so much better as a heel, and she's very boring as the good guy or girl. Bree's pretty much boring no matter what she does. But I enjoyed the Bellas a lot more when we were supposed to be rooting against them. Whereas I thought Naomi, she made a good babyface, and she's doing pretty good as a heel in a way. The problem is right now it seems like they're trying to build her into a cross between Cameron and AJ. Back when AJ was the villain, in fact, Tamina showing up and then being her bodyguard, very similar dynamic. And that's sort of the problem, is I'm not really seeing Naomi as Naomi, I'm seeing her as the people she reminds me of. Whereas at least with Nikki, I see just Nikki Bella, even though Nikki is not as good as Paige or AJ or Natalya. In fact, I'd much rather see Natalya pursuing this championship. And also, I feel personally that the Divas Championship should be defended every pay-per-view and not just every other pay-per-view. It seems like WWE has a hard-on for doing these tag team matches where there aren't any real stakes, so this match felt very irrelevant. They could have easily done this on Raw and had it lead to a title match. I don't want to see Naomi take the belt from Nikki. To me, it just needs a better storyline, and that's going to be really hard to create now because Nikki is a face, and it only would have been satisfying because if Nikki was a heel. That's another problem with this stupid-ass storyline, is in a way, Naomi is right. She was the nice girl, you liked her for what she did, and yet she didn't really get any opportunities. So it's understandable why she'd suddenly turn heel and use that as an excuse as to, or use the fact that she hasn't been getting the opportunities to explain why she has taken this more mean-spirited turn. Whereas Nikki was a sellout. She only was put into the title scene because she sold out to the Authority. And yet we're supposed to sympathize with her. WWE obviously doesn't want us to think about that. So that to me is just shit storytelling. The match itself, I don't remember anything that happened. I watched it. In fact, in some ways, I even watched it closer than I watched Bray vs. Ryback because I was always sitting on the couch in front of the TV while it played, whereas with Bray vs. Ryback, I think I did get up for something. But it's like none of the spots, none of the storytelling aspects. It's like I know I watched it, but nothing stayed with me. I don't even remember if it was good or bad. It must have not been very good. It must have been very mediocre, if anything. I had to actually look up online hoping I could, jog my memory by seeing other people's opinions, but nothing happened here. From what I hear, it was a pretty subpar match. And that makes sense because, like I said, it went in, it was like going through one ear and out the other, except going through my eyes and out my asshole, I guess I should say. I don't remember this match at all, and it couldn't have been very good if that is the case. Neville versus Barrett, exact same build as Ziggler versus Sheamus. I pretty much already described it. They wrestle a lot, and Barrett works with Sheamus a lot, and Neville works with Ziggler a lot, and they do tag team matches together. Very uninvolving storyline. The only difference is King of the Ring, which Barrett won, and that surprised me. But this would be a big deal for him, except there was very little advertising that went on in this King of the Ring. It just felt so unimportant. I don't feel that this is going to benefit Barrett in the long run, because it just seemed like such an afterthought. I was really excited when they announced that King of the Ring was returning, and then I saw the card and was like, are truth, seriously. And then, most of it was shown on the WWE network, so I didn't even realize that at first. I was thinking that it would be, some matches on Raw one week, and then some matches on Raw the next week, and then the finals would be on the pay-per-view or something, but it wasn't, and that was really dumb in my opinion. But at the same time, I really do like how Barrett carries himself as the king. His promos have been pretty entertaining, even though he doesn't seem to get that strong of a reaction from crowds anymore, which is a shame because I think he's incredibly talented. I think he could be a good main event performer, but unfortunately it doesn't seem like he has any momentum anymore. Neville is weird because he's an incredibly gifted athlete. I mean, some of the moves he does in the ring, you won't see come from anybody else, at least in the WWE. However, there isn't any character there. He hasn't shown off any real personality. I don't think he's gotten on the mic once. I have to presume that he has some talking abilities because he was, I think, the longest reigning NXT champion, and usually you need a certain degree of charisma to get the top belt in any promotion. But I haven't seen any of that. I want to see Neville start talking, even if it's just very short, brief promos that won't betray his lack of mic skills. Something they should have done with Roman Reigns. But otherwise, to me, he's just kind of a stiff for the more entertaining Barrett to play off of, even though Neville is a much better performer when it comes to match quality. The match itself was decent, but it didn't seem as good as their previous match. I don't really know what went wrong here. Let me see my notes, because I'm also... The only thing I really talk about in my notes is the finish was pretty lame and anticlimactic. I don't like those non-finish finishes. And that's what, unfortunately, this is. I expect that kind of crap from Raw, not from the pay-per-view. And that means that this feud will continue, except this feud has absolutely no stakes, no reason to continue. It's just putting them together until they can think of something better for either man. So yeah, I thought as a whole, it wasn't a bad match. Neville got to show off his cooler moves, and Barrett got to show off his stuff. But it just, the only thing that stayed with me was the crappy finish, so it just sort of left a bad taste in my mouth. So I expect better, but at the same time, I remember a little bit about it anyway, especially compared to that Diva match. But let's move on to the main storyline, the four-way battle between Rollins and Ambrose and Reigns and Orton. And let me drink this water. So, this storyline kind of went back and forth in my eyes between pretty interesting and pretty stupid. I was glad when Roman Reigns got involved. I thought, it would be an interesting pay-per-view if you had Rollins versus Orton versus Reigns, and then that could be the conclusion to the Rollins versus Orton storyline, and maybe they could move on to Rollins versus Reigns, even though I kind of want to see Rollins get a decisive victory over somebody else who does not need the World Heavyweight Championship before taking on Reigns, who I do believe will be ready to be champion at least around SummerSlam. Well, that's coming up, I guess, sooner than later. But, if maybe Ryback stepped up and ultimately lost to Rollins for a month or two, that could solidify Rollins' reign. I just feel that, they're playing up the fact that Rollins needs help a bit too much. But otherwise, I thought that was a good idea. I enjoyed, actually, the Kane storyline, the friction between him and Rollins. That created some suspense, even though it wasn't as good as it was during the build-up to Extreme Rules. I do find it strange that seems to be the dominant story here, when it should be probably focusing more on, the tension with Reigns and Ambrose and Orton. Orton especially seemed like a third wheel here. He didn't talk a whole lot. He didn't do a whole lot. But then, much to my surprise, they added Ambrose in the mix, and I did not like that at first. The reason for this is Ambrose has been booked as a complete loser. Beating Harper is not enough to propel you into the main event scene. It's good enough to propel you into the Intercontinental Championship scene, but not going for the big gold. Furthermore, just sort of convoluted the match. I think WWE relies way too much on these four-way matches, even three-way matches. I mean, when you think about it, by the time SummerSlam comes around, Rollins more than likely will only have had one-on-one match with Orton, and he needed help there. So I kind of feel that like less would be more, but I ultimately came around to this. There were some very entertaining moments involving Rollins in terms of the build-up, or not Rollins, Ambrose in terms of the build-up. I enjoyed the kind of friendly but also tense confrontations between Ambrose and Reigns. I liked the fact that they still acknowledged the continuity that these guys are friends. It was nice when, Orton attacked Reigns and then Ambrose attacked Orton. I think the fact that, Rollins was freaking out was incredibly entertaining too. And then at the same time, when Rollins started turning things in his favor, when he started, pitting everybody against each other, that made him look incredibly smart and dangerous. But when it came to this match, I had mixed feelings. There were a lot of things I really enjoyed about it. For one, it was very crisply paced. There was a lot of good spots. It was an action-packed, entertaining matchup that never had any downtime. However, in terms of the story, it just kind of seemed misguided and confused. Ambrose's presence suddenly became amazing when the Shield briefly reunited to take out Orton. I totally marked out there. That was pretty awesome. And then it was even better when Rollins was like, "Yeah, we're back together again," and they both kind of give him their death glares. And then Rollins is like, "Oh shit," and that was pretty great. I thought all of them were used well in terms of the action, except Kane. Considering all the build-up that was put into him, when he decided to side with Rollins, it just felt very anticlimactic. It just didn't seem like a big enough moment. It just seemed like he suddenly started attacking Ambrose or whoever it was. Whereas it should have been something more bombastic. Like, let's say, Rollins bumps into Kane and pushes him, and then Kane grabs Rollins and is going to chokeslam him, but then suddenly just turns around and grabs Ambrose and chokeslams him. Instead of Kane just randomly just goes up to Ambrose and starts punching him. To me, that didn't add any heat to Kane, which Kane desperately needs, because Kane doesn't get the strongest reactions anymore. But at the same time, it seemed like a wasted opportunity, or just a wasted angle considering how much time was put into it. I did like how Orton was the one who took out the Authority, just because Orton just kind of felt like a fourth wheel here. Like, he wasn't really necessary. I would have much rather have seen the Shield reunite as enemies in a three-way match. I think that would have been more special, but at the same time, that did lead to Orton's presence did lead to the power bomb, so that made it worth it, I guess. But Orton's really only major imprint on this match was taking out the Authority, and I was kind of glad that he was the one who got pinned too, just because I think everybody was expecting Ambrose to be the one who'd get pinned, and that just seemed like a weak cop-out. But Orton taking the pin kind of defies our expectations, and to me it is a good conclusion for this storyline. So now Rollins can move on to somebody else instead of just Orton. The idea of Rollins using the pedigree as his new finisher is a good one in theory, but it just doesn't look quite as strong when he's doing it. When Triple H does the pedigree, it looks like a devastating finisher. Probably because, Triple H has a lot more mass on him. So not only are you going face first into the ground, you've also got a lot more weight bearing on top of you, whereas Rollins is just too light to pull that off, in my opinion. But, he'll get better at selling it, hopefully, and it's something they could do until they decide to bring back the curb stomp. But the problem with fatal four-way matches is there's too many storylines going in, because you have the dynamic with Rollins having previously betrayed Ambrose and Reigns and screwed Reigns over, and he also has these past tensions with Orton, but at the same time you also have to have tensions between Orton and Reigns, and then can Ambrose and Reigns' friendship stay strong when they might have to fight each other. It's hard to balance that out in a single match. You could do that to an extent in the build-up, but even then you'd be surprised how little time they truly have to flesh it out. One of the reasons I think Orton ended up feeling like the fourth wheel is he doesn't appear on SmackDown very often, so he just seemed kind of irrelevant, and like the last one I figured would win. If anybody was going to win, it was going to be Rollins, but if it wasn't Rollins, it would probably be Reigns, and if it somehow was Ambrose, that would surprise me, but I could almost see that happening just to throw a shocking swerve in there. But Orton didn't stand a chance, and I think the fact that he doesn't appear on SmackDown sort of hurt his presence. But the main storyline that this was going to embrace was whether or not Kane would support Rollins. That's usually how these matches work. They have to embrace one, and then everything else is just sort of a side thought. But because I thought that was so, unsatisfactory, I think actually would have been better if Kane did turn face, chokeslam Rollins, leave, only for Rollins to somehow come out on top. That would have really given Rollins a lot of credibility. But just like I said, the way they did it was so poorly executed that it just left me emotionally uninvolved during the ending of this match. To when it came to its conclusion, I was just like, all right. It was an easy to watch match. It just, I feel that the best wrestling matches are not just exciting and entertaining, they also affect you on an emotional level. When Daniel Bryan won the World Heavyweight Championship, that was a very emotionally driven moment. You really felt that victory. You were excited for him. When Rollins took the belt at the last WrestleMania, when he cashed in his Money in the Bank, that was also a great moment. And that was a great match where you were both excited because of, the action was so good, but at the same time you were invested emotionally, or at least I was. But it's hard to do that in Fatal 4-Ways, and unfortunately, even though this match succeeded in the action department, it didn't have any real substance to it. I feel like there was something else I was supposed to talk about, but I believe that's it. So Payback, like on its own, I don't think it was really any worse than Extreme Rules. Like some matches were better and others weren't. But at the same time, Extreme Rules at least had a little bit of a novelty to it. It was the first time seeing Sheamus and Ziggler go at it, for this storyline in a one-on-one match for pay-per-view, so that's going to catch your interest a lot more. A rematch could be interesting, but at the same time, since the match was so similar, even though it's not necessarily worse, it just, that novelty's gone. With Barrett versus Neville, I did think the match was worse, but not by much. But once again, because this is just another match of theirs, we've seen them go at it so many times in the build-up, it just doesn't quite leave that impression on us. The match either needs to top itself or it needs to do something completely different, and it didn't. Cena versus Rusev, a lot better, and like I said, I thought that was a major success. I also thought it's impressive that the New Day versus Cesaro managed to top their first match. The main event was probably a little bit, I'd say the main event was better than Orton versus Rollins, which I thought was kind of underwhelming, despite the fact that it wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. But the Divas match, I think was better. See, I almost had to catch myself. Like, what was the Divas match last time? Oh yeah, it was just Nikki versus Naomi, and I think that was better than this Divas match. So, and then the pre-show, this pre-show sucked. This pre-show just really, really sucked. And I don't remember what the pre-show for the last pay-per-view was, but I'm sure it had to have been better than this. Oh yeah, it was Barrett versus Neville. So yeah, that was better. So yeah, I'd say Payback is inferior to Extreme Rules as a whole, even though it's more complicated than just saying that it's worse. It does some things better, it does some things worse, but as a whole, the problem was that it's just too much of an extension of Extreme Rules, and the novelty has worn off. So that's why I believe that this is a filler pay-per-view. It really offered very little new. I think the only new storyline that began was Bray versus Ryback, and then I feel like the Cena versus Rusev storyline has concluded, but otherwise it looks like it's building up to Extreme Rules, and I really do not like pay-per-views that only exist to build up to the next pay-per-view, unless it's Fastlane or whatever they used before WrestleMania, because that's a special case. But that is all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoy my opinions on wrestling, friend me on Facebook, because I review all the various Raws and SmackDowns and give out my predictions for these pay-per-views. Follow me on Twitter. Check out my website, where I've been doing primarily written reviews of various kung fu movies like Duel to the Death, Five Fingers of Death. The Wandering Swordsman was my last one, and my upcoming one will be Duel of the Century. I know there's no whole lot of variety to these titles. And I also reviewed Maggie, which was that new Arnold Schwarzenegger zombie flick. So please read all of those. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I shall see you guys later.